The Curse of the Queen. Reading Buzz.
The whole world was amazed when British archaeologist Howard Carter uncovered the surprisingly well-preserved tomb of Tutankhamun in 1922. It was not only the first major discovery of its time, but also the only tomb of its era that was found intact and full of indescribable treasures. The rumors of a mysterious curse helped make Tutankhamun the most popular of the Egyptian pharaohs in the modern world. The curse of the mummy began when many terrible events occurred after the discovery of King Tut's tomb. According to a legend, anyone who dared to open the tomb would suffer the wrath of the mummy. Mummies have been associated with many magical powers throughout history, and some of the mummies from Egypt were ground into a fine powder and sold as the mystical mummy powder. It is believed that the powder had magical healing powers. The curse of Tut's mummy, popularly known as the Pharaoh's curse, was soon pronounced a myth. There are people who argue that the buried secrets of ancient Egypt are dead and gone. They claim that there are no hidden terrors beneath the shifting sands of northern Africa. 3,500 years ago, an Egyptian queen was laid to rest. She was prepared for her afterlife by the embalming method of mummification, just as it was dictated by the ancient laws in the Holy Book of the Dead. All her royal possessions, which included her slaves and handmaidens, were buried with her, as it was believed that she would need all her possessions and servants to attend to her needs in the afterlife. The priests had asked the workers to bury her deep so that her tomb would lie undisturbed under the glowing sands and African skies. And there she remained until the late 19th century. The year was 1890, and as 4 young Englishmen were observing the ongoing excavation at the Luxor site, a foreman in charge of the labourers approached them and made a strange offer. He said that he would give them an extraordinary memento for a certain price. It was the marvellously handmade, gold-inlaid sarcophagus of a former queen of Egypt, Queen Hatshepsut. The 4 young adventurers could not ignore such an opportunity. They drew lots to see who would win the prize. The winner paid several hundreds of pounds and had the coffin shipped to his hotel in Cairo immediately, as many such opportunities do not easily come along. The very next day, the first tragedy struck. One of the 4 men was mysteriously shot in the arm by an Egyptian manservant. The wound was such a terrible one that the arm had to be amputated. The curse of Queen Hatshepsut had begun. Upon returning to England, the curse followed the second man in the party. He discovered that the bank where he kept all his savings had failed, and he was left penniless. In less than a month's time, another of the 4 lost his position in the company he had worked at for a few years. He did not get a decent job anywhere and was forced to make a living selling matchboxes on street corners. Meanwhile, the coffin slowly approached England. Queen Hatshepsut's mummy sailed towards Britain in a British merchant's ship. Seeing the terrible things that happened to his companions, the purchaser of the sarcophagus hurriedly arranged for the sale of the artifact to a London merchant, for he feared greatly. The merchant took possession of the royal coffin on the docks of Liverpool. As it was being unloaded, a winch slipped and a heavy wooden crate crashed to the docks, killing 2 longshoremen. Within 3 weeks of accepting delivery of the accursed coffin, the merchant rid himself of its evil by donating it to the Royal British Museum. During the 3 weeks he owned the coffin, several of his family members had become severely ill and a minor fire had erupted in his house. By now, the sarcophagus of Queen Hatshepsut had become the talk of the city. Yet, the museum agreed to take the sarcophagus for display in its famous Egyptian section. As the coffin was being unloaded from a wagon in the courtyard of the museum, an axle gave way and the heavy wagon badly injured a woman passerby. She had to be rushed to a nearby hospital. The mishaps did not end there. Two workmen carrying the coffin up the steps into the museum slipped, and one of them fractured his leg. 2 days later, the younger man died. Doctors were unable to determine the cause of his death, but Londoners suspected it was the mummy. The Queen's stay in the Royal Museum was not at all a peaceful one. The night watchmen swore that they heard low moans coming from the Egyptian section. Many workers left their jobs at the museum even after the directors offered them higher wages to stay. Mysterious fires broke out in odd places. Museum staff fell ill for no reason. Other exhibits in the room were found destroyed or tossed about by some unseen forces. Finally, the sarcophagus was removed from the exhibit. The chief messenger of the museum supervised the removal of the rare artifact to a secure area in the basement. Now, the authorities breathed a sigh of relief, as they felt certain that the sarcophagus and its queen would cause no more trouble. Within a week, one of the workmen who had helped move the coffin to the basement fell very ill. The day after that, the chief messenger was found sitting at his desk in the museum, dead. All the London newspapers had articles on the curse of the Egyptian queen. A news photographer had taken a photo in the mummy case, and when the photograph was developed, the painted face on the lid somehow changed into a terrifying face of a screaming human. The photographer left the paper and ran home. Authorities found his body 2 days later. He had shot himself in the head. The museum authorities soon found that no other museum in England or the continent would take the sarcophagus. The fact that more than 30 people connected with the artifact had already met with tragedy had been well publicized. At last, the museum authorities found a wealthy American collector who offered them a large sum for the Queen and the sarcophagus. Arrangements were made for the sarcophagus of Queen Hatshepsut to be shipped to New York City. As it so happened, the next ship making steam for New York was the newest ship of the White Star Line. The Queen would ride along on its maiden voyage. On April 14, 1912, in the chill of the night, the Queen went down with 1,500 other passengers to a watery tomb in the North Atlantic. The American collector had chosen to ship his Queen on the Titanic. That is where the tale of tragedy and death ended, at the bottom of the ocean in the North Atlantic, until 2001, when a new chapter was written. The company that had overseen the deep-sea recovery of Titanic artifacts had run into difficulties, and it was said that perhaps the Queen's curse was still at work. The company managed to store quite a few of the recovered artifacts in a deep, secured vault. The priceless objects were placed near other vaults containing ingots of silver and bars of gold. On September 11, 2001, the vaults were buried under millions of tons of rubble as the World Trade Center collapsed as a result of 2 terrorist attacks. Had the curse of Queen Hatshepsut reached out to claim more victims one last time?